Good afternoon all and welcome to our webinar series and the last for year 2019. Thank you for being a part of our growth all through the webinar series we've held since February. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for giving us the opportunity to deliver value to you. I remain your anchor, Henrietta Chukwuka, and today we'll be discussing a very interesting topic as a crowning to our webinar series for 2019, a topic called Organizational Resilience or Leading Organizational Resilience. I took a definition from Cranfield University on organizational resilience, and it says it is the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to incremental change and sudden disruptions in order to survive and prosper. Now that quote was taken again, like I said earlier, from Cranfield University. And we have with us today our discussants, a professor of leadership and organizational change from Cranfield University or Cranfield School of Management. But before I put him on to take his session, I'd like to share with us some of our housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded and the slide will be provided to every participant at the end of the session. Questions can be sent through the Q&A box on your Zoom control panel, and it will be addressed during the Q&A session. We therefore implore that in the course of this session, send in your questions and it will be addressed after the professor comes up. We urge you as well to keep your microphones turned off at all times. At this point, I'd like to quickly run through some of the things my guest has done. My guest is a highly cited author, an engaging keynote speaker, and an educator. He's a professor of leadership and organizational change, as said earlier, and is the commercial director at Cranfield School of Management. He has an international reputation for his work on leadership, change, and organizational resilience. He is also a past recipient of the UK's most influential thinker and was voted by the HR magazines. Please welcome with me, Professor David Daniel. Sir, you're welcome to this afternoon's session.
Thank you, Henrietta. And yes, good afternoon, everyone. We're just bringing up my slides at the moment. Hopefully you'll be able to see them in a second.
Thank you for taking out time out of your busy schedule for us this afternoon.
Not a problem. It's a great privilege and honor to be speaking to you today and to all the participants.
Okay, so sir, let's hear from you. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Not yet.
No, okay, we're just getting the slides up.
Okay. Yes, we see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I just scroll down. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Sorry that there was a delay to the start of the session. We had a few technical issues at our end, but hopefully they're resolved now, and hopefully you can all see the slides. So the session this afternoon is about leading organizational resilience. And it really is going to be split between those two things. I want to talk about organizational resilience, what it is and why it's important, particularly in a time of continuous and rapid change, and where a lot of organizations are dealing with ongoing disruptions to their business and the business environment. So I want to talk about organizational resilience on the one hand, and give you a framework for thinking about some of the challenges that you are facing as business leaders, and a way of thinking about the different approaches to organizational resilience. And then I want to, towards the end of the session, talk about leadership in relation to organizational resilience, and to address the question of what kind of leadership do we need for addressing 21st century problems. And one of the challenges that I'm going to put forward is that I think we often revert back to some very old models of leadership and an older way of thinking about leadership that maybe is not fit for purpose for some of the challenges that we're facing today. So that's the sort of broad overview of what I want to discuss. If you can see my second slide here, I wanted to give you a personal story about why I got into the whole area of resilience and leadership in the first place. I've been at Cranfield for a long time, and as an academic. Before that, I worked for a company that ran large infrastructure assets in the UK, and that company ran part of the road network, part of the rail network. It ran estates for the Ministry of Defence and for local government. And it was an organisation that had a number of key clients. It was one of the market leaders in the industry, and it had a lot of big projects that were 15, 20-year contracts, really large infrastructure projects. And back in 2003, so quite a long time ago now, when I was working there, this incident happened in the UK. And it's probably, for a lot of people online, an incident that is sort of a million miles away from your experience. But what happened is it snowed in the UK. And you go, okay, doesn't it always snow in the UK? What was particularly important about this event, and something that really impacted me, was that the company that I worked for were responsible for not gritting the roads on the M25, which is the road that goes around London, and the M11, which is the road that goes from London to a place called Cambridge. And people, as you can see in the image, people were trapped in their cars, and actually were trapped in their cars overnight. No one died in this incident. No one was even injured, but people were really inconvenienced because of this situation. Now, the company, as I said, the company that I worked for were responsible for not gritting the roads. So they'd got the warning from the Met Office, from the weather warning that it was going to snow. And a group of leaders in the organisation decided not to grit the roads, and they'd got the contractors ready to go out and to do the gritting. And what happened was that it became a front page news story in every national newspaper in the UK, with pictures of my company, the organisation that I work for, the picture of our logo on the side of the lorry, and the photographers had a really annoying habit of capturing it just sort of a perfect angle with the snow coming down. If you'd have asked anyone on, say, the Wednesday of that week, were we a resilient organisation? Were we high performing? Was it a good place to work? Every single person would have said yes. By the Friday, we were seen on the front page of every newspaper in the UK as a failed organisation. So within 48 hours, something as simple as some snowfall, plus a really bad leadership decision, made that organisation appear to be a failed organisation in the eyes of its clients and all of its stakeholders. That impact on the organisation was significant, to the extent that they actually at that time sent me to Cranfield to set up a research centre, which they paid for about 5 years, addressing the question, why do organisations fail? And how do we create organisations that are more resilient? And that's kind of what I've been looking at ever since. And I've been working on this topic in a range of different sectors, from one extreme being the nuclear industry, So nuclear power, nuclear reprocessing, to the other end, hospitals, healthcare. I've been working a lot with aviation companies. I've been working with oil and gas companies. I've been working with banks and insurance companies, all around this issue of how we create more resilient organizations. What I learned from that lesson, and what I've learned ever since, is that disruptive events, disturbances to the organization don't just happen, that organizations drift into failure over a period of time. As you can see from this image, which I think a picture says 1,000 words, what I see all the time in organizations is that they are looking backwards upstream at their past success. It's a nice sunny day, so the guy in the image has got his sunglasses on. The image is not the best image there. I think you can see that he's just about to see that he's wearing a pair of headphones. And that's significant because over a period of time, organizations often have the warning signs. There are signals of impending problems. But if the leaders in the organization have a pair of headphones on, and even if people are willing to speak up in the organization, whether they are willing to listen and hear those warning signs. So what I see is a lot of organizations looking backwards, headphones on, nice sunny day. It all feels very calm. It's actually easier to row downstream. So we're going faster and faster, and it all feels like it's successful until we go over the waterfall that's right behind us, because we don't see it coming. And every organization that I work with says that, uses the term, it's a surprising event. Whereas when we look back with hindsight, maybe it shouldn't have been as surprising. And there are things that organizations can do to become more resilient. So I see in organizations that often we'll talk about change and leading change in the organization. Well, change is never a simple process of going from A to B. There's always challenges and disruptions and disturbances along the way. And for me, we need to really think about how we lead for resilience, as well as how we think about leading for change. And the definition that was given by Henrietta at the start, a simple version of that is that resilience is about surviving, but it's also about thriving regardless of the challenge. It's not just about stopping bad things happening, but it's also about the organization innovating and growing and doing new things so that it's relevant in the context. So sometimes it's not just about being reactive, it's about being proactive. And as Henrietta said in that opening piece, the definition that we use is that organizational resilience is the organization's ability to anticipate. So how does it see these problems coming, how to prepare for them, so the organization is prepared, but you can't prepare for everything. And there will always be some disruptions that are outside the repertoire of responses that the organization has planned for. So how does the organization respond and adapt to them? And I would put into that definition also that how does the organization learn from its own disruptions? And a lot of organizations aren't particularly good at learning from disruptive events as well. As I said, I wanted to talk about two things in this webinar. One is the resilience, and I'll get back to that and talk about how we think about resilience. But I also want to talk about leadership. And there's this little cartoon on the slide here where a person's talking to the policeman, and the policeman says, "Oh, have you lost your keys?" "Yes, I've lost my keys." "Well, did you lose them under this lamp?" And the person says, "No, they weren't under this lamppost, they're in the car park, but I'm looking under the lamp because that's where the light is." And I think when we're looking at leadership, my fear is that we're doing the same thing. We are looking for leadership in the wrong places in the organization. And I think we're often applying a 20th, if not 19th century model of leadership to 21st century problems. But whenever I see an organization that it has a level of uncertainty in the business environment or has had a disruptive event, what it tends to do is look for a new leader, a leader who can provide a new vision, a leader who has the answers to the organization's problems. And it's if only we have a better leader, or we can improve the leaders in our own organization, then we will be able to resolve some of these issues. I think actually we need to rethink what leadership means in relation to some of these really complex challenges that organizations are facing, and think about leadership in a different way. And I want to cover that in this webinar as well. So just some objectives. I want to get you to think about your broader context of change. I want you to think about resilience challenges facing your own organization. And then what I'm going to do is ask you to think about your challenges in relation to what I call the strategic tensions model of resilience. And I'll give you that model. And I think it'll be really helpful because it identifies 4 ways in which organizations can become more resilient. And then I want to get back to this question of, okay, so therefore, what's the leadership capability that is required for resilient organizations? And hopefully you'll have something at the end of this to take back to your own organizations. So just a few thoughts. Webinars are always really difficult because it's a one-way transmission, and we've got technology, and we've already had a few technical hitches this morning. But I just want you to sort of think to yourselves, you know, you would get more out of this webinar and the materials that you can have afterwards, and to think about. It's often dependent on what you put in. So I think just think about how valuable do you want this experience to be? How engaged and active do you want to be? It's far more engaging and I think helpful if you do ask some questions at the end. So please, as we go through, write down any questions you have, ask them at the end. If you don't get a chance to ask them at the end, I'm going to give you a link to my LinkedIn profile. I've written some articles on resilience and leadership. People contact me on LinkedIn all the time. Please do that. You can always fire some questions at me there. I think when you're thinking about resilience, and particularly if you're taking this back to your organizations and say, okay, we have to really think about this resilience topic, and we have to think about leadership, that involves some risk to people to actually challenge the status quo. I think resilience is about challenging some of the assumptions that we have about organizations and also about leadership. So I think that does take some risk. And also just think, what do you need? Because there are some things that maybe I can offer and send out to you afterwards, some additional information. So just think after this webinar, what else you might need, and we'll see if we can provide that. I want to talk now about some of the broader challenges that organizations are facing, and also just show you some of the things that Cranfield are doing in response to some of those challenges. So we all know that global warming is definitely the biggest issue that is facing organizations today. There's a lot of calls at the moment, and the United Nations identifying how organizations need to respond to those. One of the things that Cranfield has is this nice sort of purple-pink glass house. We have the world's reference selection of soils from all around the world, and this glass house looks at the how different temperatures in any region of the world can be recreated, and we can look at crop yield from anywhere, any location in the world in response to those issues of climate change. This video is one of the things we were trying to get to play earlier, but unfortunately we've been unable to get it, but it is available on YouTube. It's a person that you can see here on a high diving board, and it's just about a 30-second clip. They dive off the diving board, and the trees in the background all go very grey, and the water from the pool disappears. And I think it's just such an excellent representation of the impact of global climate change and water shortages that we're going to suffer in many parts of the world in just a short video clip. As I said, it's on YouTube, and I'm sorry I couldn't play this for you. Some of the other big global shifts that organizations are facing around the world. This is an image from the London terrorist attacks. There's increased terrorist activity around the world. I'm sure you've all heard that Britain's had a challenge of trying to leave the European Union, and the issues around Brexit and how we are struggling to deal with that as a really complex problem. Did you know that that a child born in 10 years ago is a third of those children, well, in the UK at least, are expected to live to the age of 100 now, whereas a much smaller percentage 20 years ago. So we've got an aging population, an aging demographic that is putting a lot of pressures on healthcare systems around the world, and on pension schemes of organizations, and how we actually manage an older workforce, and how we need to change the world of work and working conditions to account for that. And the image on the bottom right is international migration and the issue of people being trafficked around the world, which again, all of these things are hitting the headlines every day as big social and economic and political changes that are facing organizations of all types. This is another little video that unfortunately is not playing. You can again get this on YouTube, but it was a video that shows the rapid urbanization around the world in lots of different countries. At the moment, the world's population that lives in urban areas is just over 50%. In 20 years' time, that's going to be at least 2/3 of the world's population live in urban areas. This video shows the expansion of some of the cities all around the world. And again, huge impact on infrastructure systems, on public utilities, on healthcare systems, and social systems like policing and so on, all around the world. So rapid urbanization. This is a screenshot of Cranfield, or what Cranfield University will look like in the next couple of years, and literally is the next couple of years. In the middle of the image there, you can see an autonomous vehicle. We're going to have the UK's first test track for autonomous vehicles, which means that we're going to have autonomous cars going up and down the campus, and hopefully not bumping into any of our students along the way. But autonomous cars are literally a year or two away from being tested on the Cranfield campus. This next image is our remote air traffic control centre. So Cranfield has an airport. It's the only UK university that has an airport. And of course, if you have an airport, you have an air traffic control tower. The air traffic control tower at Cranfield will soon be run. The traditional notion of air traffic control tower will be switched off, and we'll be running the air traffic control, as you can see, from an office space looking at a computer screen. And this remote air traffic control center could switch to running any airport around the globe, simply by changing the screen and the panels. And that's what it's moving to. Just shows you the rapid pace of technological change. We've got at Cranfield a lot of work going on drones, and there's been a lot of issues around drones in proximity to airports around the world. And the dangers that brings. We're going to have an air corridor that tests drones in relation to airports, but also we're doing some work around drones and delivery. So two issues with drones is that, as you can see in the image, the blades are on the outside, which is pretty dangerous in public areas, but also small drones get blown around by the wind. So how do we create drones that can combine together? They can all go up. They can come over, deliver shopping, split apart over a city, and then deliver goods and services. So again, this isn't science fiction. These changes aren't happening 20, 30 years away. These changes are happening very soon. So there are some really big external changes going on around your organizations, as well as changes inside your organizations, issues around distribution, food, energy and water's changing, emerging economies, rapid urbanization, demographics, social change, the digital revolution and artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of those things. There's often an acronym that's being used a lot more these days that's called Vuca. So Vuca is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. It was a term that came out of the military, actually, and some operations in Afghanistan. And people were saying, well, these military operations are becoming much more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that was used to describe that kind of military campaign. And that's been picked up now in the world of business to describe the rapidly changing business world. And of course, when things are volatile and they're uncertain, complex and ambiguous, that actually tends to drive an organization a set of very defensive mindsets and very defensive sets of behaviors, which actually I think can constrain and be difficult for the organization, therefore, to be resilient. Okay, I want you to have a think about your challenges that you're facing in your organization. And I'm just going to give you literally just 30 seconds to write down on a piece of paper, or if you've got some post-it notes with you, or easy enough just to drop them on a piece of paper. Think about the changes that your organization is going to deal with in the next 18 months to 3 years. And think about those broader external challenges, the big things that are going on in the environment, but also what about the internal changes in the organization? Have you got changes around your organizational strategy, your business model, the systems that you've got in place? And what about the staff? What about your demographic of your staff? Are you losing experienced staff? Are you finding it difficult to recruit people into the organization? Are there changes that you need to deal with in terms of new products, new services as you're going forward? What about things like your information systems and the platforms that you've got, the roles that people have, data, information? So there's a whole range of different challenges that your organization needs to deal with in the next 18 months to 3 years. So please just make a list. See if you can get to, in the next 30 seconds or so, just a list of 6, maybe 10 key changes that you see your organization will need to deal with as it moves forward. Okay, so hopefully you've all made a list, and you can continue to make the list and hopefully multitask and listen to me as we go on. If you can get that list up to 10 items, that'd be really helpful, because I'm just going to introduce a model that I would then like you to think about in relation to those problems that you've identified. So to build the model, I want to give you it's a model of organizational resilience, and I want to give you 4 examples of organizations that haven't been resilient. So remember our definition: organizational resilience, the ability of the organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond and adapt to both incremental change and sudden disruptions. And you've already thought about some of those changes and disruptions that might be affecting your business. And so the opposite of that is organizations that haven't anticipated, haven't prepared for, haven't responded and haven't adapted. And I'm going to give you four examples. So this first example is a nuclear reprocessing plant. So an energy company, in the nuclear industry, that reprocesses nuclear fuel. And this nuclear power station, as you can imagine, is an organization that has lots of controls in place to stop disruptive events. So this is our first kind of archetype example of how an organization tries to be resilient. So one way to be resilient is through control and through prevention and through protection. And what a nuclear power plant will do, and what an oil and gas company will do, or a chemical company, is normally build defenses in depth. So it builds lots of defenses to stop bad things happening. And what it tends to do is have a culture that is about standard operating procedures, lots of process, lots of measurement, and lots of compliance in orientation. So the first type of organization is one that focuses on control. And the first way to address resilience is to think about how you control against those threats. The problem for this nuclear reprocessing plant is that I think it emphasized so much the control that it drove out what I would call the mindfulness from the organization, i.e. that the people started to rely on the control and created an illusion where the organization couldn't fail because it had so many defenses in place to stop it failing. And so what happened in this organization was that it actually had a leak of 83,000 liters of radioactive nitric acid with 19 metric tons of uranium and plutonium. And you go, okay, that's pretty bad. It didn't breach secondary containment, it breached primary containment. So there was no environmental damage, but it was a significant event for this organization. I think the amazing thing about this is that it was the flagship plant. It's got some of the best technology, and it had some of the best nuclear engineers in the world. And amazingly, this nuclear power station didn't notice that it had a reprocessing plant. This nuclear reprocessing plant didn't notice that it had a leak for 8 months. Yet it's got some of the best people and some of the best technology, okay? So this illusion of control that it created meant that it drove out the mindfulness. People lost any situational awareness. They didn't notice the problem. They came up with an alternative explanation for the problem, which I'm sure you'll agree is quite amazing. But it's amazing how many organizations I've seen do similar things. And it had a massive impact on that organization. So here you've got an organization, lots of control, but no mindfulness. My second organization is a professional services firm. So it's a consultancy company. And this organization had lots of mindfulness. It had lots of adaptability. It was a company that was very devolved business. So it was one big company, but it was really like lots of small organizations, lots of small businesses. Each one was run like its own business. It had kind of its own even IT system, its own marketing department, its own business development group. And each one of those ran as a very kind of autonomous, empowered group. So its strength was that whatever the client wanted, it could fix the problem, it could respond to the client, it was very quick, it was very rapid, it would give a personalized service because it's got these very highly skilled, empowered people that could deal with any problem that the client had. The problem was that the market changed and uncertainty came into the business environment. And that combined with a competitor that came in that offered a service that was almost as good, but at a much lower cost because it found a volume way of doing it. So you've got here a consultancy company, very responsive, but in a market that's very uncertain with a very high fixed cost base. And it just wasn't efficient enough to compete and pretty much went out of business. So here, that was an organization, responsiveness, but not efficient. My third example is an organization that was incredibly efficient at doing what it's always done. And you might even be able to guess this one as I talk through. It's a famous, iconic case. So this is a consumer and office products company. Several years ago, it had 80% of the market share. You can imagine having an 80% market share worldwide. So it's a significant organization, really big brand. And it invented the disruptive technology that it recognized could disrupt the marketplace. And it recognized that it probably would do that in about 10 years. And so this organization, and I'll tell you who it is now, it was Kodak. Kodak had the lab that invented digital photography. Yet the leaders inside the organization said, and there's a quote there that said, "That's very cute, but let's not kill the company's golden egg." i.e., we are doing really well selling our existing products to our existing marketplace. Why do we want to bring in this new disruptive technology that could actually take away from and cannibalize our market share? What happened was their competitors took that technology that they developed it when Kodak didn't, and Kodak lost 90% of its workforce worldwide and ended up being bankrupt. So here's an organization that was very efficient, unlike the consultancy company, at doing what it's always done, but it wasn't very innovative. It didn't really leverage its innovation. Now, this fourth example is the opposite of that. So here's an organization that is incredibly innovative, incredibly adaptive. So rather than responding to a disruption, this organization was the disruption. Okay, and this is a fourth way of becoming resilient. So yeah, again, you might recognize this one. So a disruptive on-demand transportation provider. It owns no vehicles, but delivers 1 million journeys every day. And within 10 years became one of the highest valued private startup companies in the world. Got this one yet? So this one is Uber. And one of the issues that Uber has had is every country it's operated in, there's been protests, there's been legal action, there's been accusations of tax evasion, allegations of discrimination. And at the moment in the UK, Uber's likely to lose its license for operating in London because of those legal disputes. And at one point, the valuation of Uber was knocked down by 22 billion and the chief executive resigned because of all the legal disputes. So here you've got an organization that's incredibly adaptive. It's really good at innovation, completely new business model, but it doesn't have the governance and the systems and processes in place. Okay, so all of these are failures. They've all attempted to be resilient in different ways, but in over attempting and over pushing a singular way of doing resilience, they've created a blind spot and a point of failure somewhere else. And this sort of builds towards my model that I'm going to give you. So all of these failures were created by what I would call strategic tensions. So the first one is that you've got control, a nuclear reprocessing plant, without mindful action. The second one, the consultancy, very responsive, but no efficiency. In the Kodak case, efficiency and optimization of doing what they've always done, but without the innovation. And Uber's case, the innovation without the governance. So this leads me to think, well, hold on then, isn't resilient about shifting the mindset from it being either or these things to a both and? So it's about having controls and mindfulness, responsiveness and efficiency, optimization and innovation and governance. And this for me is how you do organizational resilience. So let me just pick up on these, the two key tensions that I see and build towards this model. And I use the analogy of a road to explain the tensions, the two core tensions for organizational resilience. And the first tension is about the mindset. So you wrote down earlier 6 or 10 changes that your organization is facing moving forward. Now, is your organization's mindset, the mindset of leaders, the mindset of people in the organization, when they think about that problem or that change, do they see it as a threat, or do they see it as an opportunity? Every challenge facing an organization can be seen as either a threat or an opportunity. Generally, if it's seen as an opportunity, the organization's more in a progressive mindset. A progressive mindset in an organization is an organization that says, we're going to be focused on production. It's about growth. It's about creating competitive advantage. It's about leveraging opportunities, achieving results. It's about making things happen. Okay? A defensive mindset in an organization sees problems as a threat. It's about stopping things happening. It's about mitigating the consequences. It's about protecting the organization, protecting our current results. And I see in organizations that this shifts over time. So we're all aware of the banking crisis that the world has suffered back in 2008 and the collapse of financial markets. If you took a position in the middle of my road and you said, well, there's a perfect balance between progressive and defensive mindset. So we've got a really nice balance, a really healthy balance. I think in the lead up to 2008, we shifted to the left-hand side of that road towards the progressive side. We put more and more, banks put more and more risk into mortgage products. They deregulated the system, more and more risk was taken, and we moved towards a progressive mindset. Nothing bad has happened yet, so let's just put more and more risk in. Let's become more and more progressive. We move over towards the progressive side. Then something bad happens. Then what we tend to do is have a knee-jerk reaction to the other side of the road. We put more systems, more process, more compliance, more regulation into the system, and we move over to the other side of the road. And we go over there until organizations think, hold on, if we go too far, if we're too defensive, then we go out of business anyway, because we're not competitive. So we start drifting back over to the other side of the road. And I see a lot of organizations moving down the road in this shift between progressive and defensive. Having an incident, then putting in place controls, then loosening the controls, having an incident, and we move back and forward across the two. My second dimension of resilience here is how you actually do resilience. So how you put resilience into your structures, your systems, your routines, and your behaviors. And I see that there's a real difference between how organizations approach resilience. So some, like my nuclear processing plant, or maybe an oil and gas company or a chemical company, high hazard environment, they tend to try to be resilient by being more consistent. So it's a bit like my Lego blocks. You build the layers of defense, consistent barriers, and it's about standardization, compliance, monitoring, control, regulation. That's all about making the system more consistent. Yet other organizations will say, hold on, we actually need to be flexible. And it's more like an elastic band. We need the organization to be able to stretch and bounce back and stretch and then bounce back. It's about mitigating the problems. It's about responding and absorbing these challenges. And yet other organizations will go even beyond that and say, we can never really bounce back. It's just about constantly adapting, transforming, morphing, and bouncing forward to be resilient. So this is, we've done mindset, and now we've got approach. And what this does is it gives me a model of organizational resilience. This 2x2 model with the one axis being between progressive and defensive, the top and the bottom, and the left and the right being consistency and flexibility. And what you then get is 4 approaches to being resilient. And if you look at my example of the nuclear reprocessing plant, it has a defensive mindset. It's trying to stop bad things happening, and it's trying to do that by consistency. So it is preventative control. But I would argue that they pulled so far into that bottom left-hand quadrant, the preventative control quadrant, that they drove out any of the mindful action in the organization, which is the bottom right-hand side. The consultancy company was trying to be very responsive, reactive, and trying to be flexible. It had great teamwork, this bottom right-hand side, and it was very responsive, but it wasn't very efficient. So they pulled so far into this mindful action box that they drove out the top left box, which is what I call performance optimization, improving and exploiting our current systems and processes. It's trying to be consistent because it's doing what we've always done, but it's progressive because it's about improvement. It's about getting better and better, getting more from less. Kodak were great at that. They pulled so far into that top left box that they drove out the top right box. And Uber is a classic example of being the top right. Uber is in that top right adaptive innovation box. It imagined a completely new future and it created one. And that's what that top right box is all about. But they've pulled so far into the top right box that they've driven out the bottom left. They haven't got the preventative control measures, which meant that they've had all of these issues of legal action and difficulties and are being closed down in lots of the areas that they're working in. So again, that's a disruption. It's not being resilient in the longer term. So earlier I asked you to think about your problems. What I'd be really interested in is you now just thinking about what does your response to those problems need to be? So if you've written something down that maybe you think, oh, that's going to require a completely innovative new approach. It's not just doing a process that we've got off the shelf, something we've done before, then it would go in the top right-hand box. If it's something where you think, yeah, we've actually got a process in place for doing that, and it's about maybe stopping something happening, maybe it's about something like a cyber attack on your business, most organizations would put that bottom left because they want to have a consistent approach and it's a defensive agenda. So you can actually place all of your problems into that matrix. And I'll invite you to do that as I continue to talk. What I have argued with this model is that no single organization sits in one of those boxes. There is always a balance between all four in any one organization. And the red square that I've got on the screen here could just represent how one organization might be balanced. And the one, if this was a real organization, this has got a balance of adaptive and mindful action, but it's got very little preventative control performance optimization. I would actually argue that that's probably a fair profile of the banks in the run up to 2008. We were shifting to the right-hand side. And then where I think I've worked with a lot of banks recently and insurance companies, global insurance and banking companies that are now saying that their whole culture is being dragged down into the bottom left-hand side because of the controls and the regulation on the system. And whenever an organization has a major disruptive event, we get pulled down towards the preventative control box. Okay, so one thing that I invite you to do is, and you can do this after the session or during the question part, is just draw on a piece of paper the axes and a square of where you think your organization is currently. And if you do that, and you've done the first activity that I suggested, which is plotting up your problems, what I've seen in a lot of organizations is there's a mismatch between the problems they're trying to deal with and their current approach. So I see a lot of organizations now that I'm working with, put a lot of the problems in the adaptive innovation or the mindful action box, yet their current approach is on the left-hand side. It's either preventative control or performance optimization. And this for me is a challenge because that really means that organizations are not configured to deal with their future problems. So we need to make some kind of change. And this quote I really like from Heifetz and Linsky, who've written about adaptive leadership, is that there's no such thing as a dysfunctional organization. Every organization is perfectly aligned to get the results it currently gets. So if you draw on those axes a square that's on, say, the bottom left, but your problems are on the bottom right, you're actually perfectly configured to get your current results, which are performance optimization. You need to configure differently if you want to get adaptive innovation. So we do need to lead the organization. I think this is all about leadership. I think resilience is all about leadership, and it's about culture. Peter Drucker, one of the management gurus from quite a few years ago, said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, if it's eating your strategy for breakfast, culture will eat your resilience as well. And my 4 aspects of resilience that I've been arguing through the webinar so far has been that you can have resilience through control, the nuclear reprocessing plant, responsiveness, optimization, and innovation. But if you don't get the culture right in the organization, you lose all of those things as well, and you lose your resilience. We've developed a tool that enables organizations to do a cultural audit around the 2-box model, because what I've asked you to do is basically to give your first impression of where your square might be, your profile. But we've actually got a cultural tool that will be able to look at that across the whole organization. And it breaks it down between what different groups in the organization think, what the senior management team thinks, and what others think. And it breaks it down into questions around purpose, people, process, and the product of the organization. Okay, just in my last few minutes, and it's literally the last 5 minutes, I want to talk about, get back to this issue about leadership, and have we got the right leadership for really driving that resilience agenda. If you think about your challenges that you've written down on your piece of paper, the things that go on the left-hand side in my model tend to be what I would call complicated problems or complicated change. The stuff on the right is more complex. And complicated change is where you've got a problem where it's easy to identify what the problem is. You can define it. You can understand it within your current paradigm, your current mindset. You can usually resolve complicated problems with authority or expertise. They generally require quite localized, contained changes. And with a complicated change, you know when you've achieved it. So you can say, okay, we can stop now, we've achieved it, we've addressed the problem. And you can say it was the right or wrong. You can say, yeah, we've got the right solution to this. And you can often do it kind of top down by edict. Whereas a complex change is much more difficult to identify and therefore easy to deny. If you take something like global warming or urbanization, it's a really difficult problem. And with global climate change, for many years, people even denied that it was happening. These kind of problems, complex problems, require a completely new solution. You can't take one off the shelf and then use that solution. You have to learn your way to a new solution. And those solutions tend to come bottom up from people, not top down from leaders in an organization. They usually require changes from the whole system, not just a local change. And with these types of problems, it's really difficult to say that you can stop. So I've been working with the UK Civil Aviation Authority. So they regulate safety of aeroplanes in the UK and flights in the UK airspace. How, an organization like that, how do you know that you've done enough to ensure safety? You know, there is no stopping rule. You never know that you've done enough to be resilient. And there's no wrong or right answer. A lot of problems, these problems that if you address the problem over here, you can create another problem over here. And they're going to require experimentation and new discoveries. Pictorially represented this as saying, this is how we tend to deal with complicated problems. What you tend to do is gather data, analyze the data, formulate a solution, and implement the solution. Whereas I think complex problems are far more difficult than that. They're not an easy linear solution to them. They require people working across boundaries, across borders, bringing in lots of diverse views and perspectives to really deal with those really complex issues. Aligned to this, when we think about leadership, we often think about leaders. And I put up a few people up there that have leadership positions. And the question would be, do people in leadership positions offer the right leadership for dealing with complex problems? I think a lot of the leaders that we see as being great leaders, whether they're in the world of politics or in the world of business or in the world of sport, what we tend to see is that they often exhibit really good leadership for more complicated problems and less for really complex problems. And we tend to go back when we think about leadership to the qualities of individual leaders. Now, I think that is challenging and is one of the explanations of why we're not making progress on some of these really big, more complex issues. There's a great model by a guy called Keith Grint who's written about this. And Keith Grint talks about 3 types of problems, and they're very similar to the 2 that I've offered you, which I said complicated and complex. So instead of complicated, complex, Grint will talk about tame and wicked problems, but he also talks about critical problems. And Grint's view of a critical problem is that it's a problem where it's time bound. So we've got a problem and the leader needs to provide the answer to that. You know, maybe I'm in a building now, there's, I see smoke under the door, I'm going to tell everyone to get out of the building. I'm going to provide the answer. It's time-bound critical problem. And as a leader, I need to demonstrate some authority to deal with that problem quickly. What Grint said is the more we move towards a more complex problem, then the more we need to move to a more collaborative solution. It's not just about the individual leader. As we move to a tame problem or a complicated problem, the leader's role is actually more about managing, and it's about organizing a process. And therefore, if we've got a tame problem, we can specify what the outcome is going to be, we can clarify roles and responsibilities, and we can work out a process for addressing that problem. Works absolutely perfectly for a tame problem or a complicated problem. If we move to a wicked or complex problem, then what we tend to require is a much more collaborative solution, more bottom-up, more learning, more empowerment, people working across boundaries and borders, bringing in divergent views, divergent perspectives, embracing diversity. And here the leader can't have the answer. The leader can only ask good questions to try and build towards a solution. And as we move along the bottom piece there, it's a shift from a more power and authority model of leadership into one that's more about rational and providing the evidence for why we need to change. And on the right-hand side, as we move into these really complicated problems, it's about changing the culture, it's about changing people's values, it's about changing beliefs, it's about creating an environment where people feel safe to experiment. And that's a very different form of leadership. And so I think this is my last slide. I see that we have a paradox of leadership in organizations, that we often have the leadership that works really well for complicated or tame problems and not for complex problems or wicked problems. And what I see in a lot of organizations that face uncertainty is what we all crave when we're faced with these really uncertain situations or situations that are threatening, is it creates anxiety in people. What we really want as individuals is the leader to stand up and say, okay, I'm the strong, stable leader. I have an answer to this. We have the expertise to deal with it. I'm going to push through change. I'm going to make it happen. And someone that we can all get behind. That's what we want. But what we actually need to deal with these really complex problems is more collaborative processes, more collective action, more leadership at all levels, people taking ownership, creativity, learning, systems and not silos, and people really asking questions, not providing the answers. So what we've got is this paradox of leadership in uncertain VUCA environments, this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, is the leader that we want isn't actually the leadership that we need. And back to my point about organizational resilience, is that there's no perfect model for organizational resilience, and it's not an either or. I think the same is true for leadership for the 21st century, leadership for complex problems. It's not an either or, having the strong, stable leader or the collaborative leadership and ownership. It's a both and. It's about doing both. So as leaders, being the leader that everyone wants you to be, but also creating the environment for leadership to occur and to be more distributed across the organization. So my very last slide is just, as I said right at the start, is that I've published quite a few articles on this on LinkedIn, and I would encourage you to connect to me. So please do that now before you leave the webinar. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, it's LinkedIn and then David Denyer. I've published 4 articles literally in the last month on organizational resilience and 2 on leadership for the 21st century and the future of leadership. So there are some articles on there, and there's quite a good discussion going on around some of those issues that I've just given you a very brief overview of today. But please do connect to me on LinkedIn and we can further the discussion. So thank you very much. And now I think we've got time for questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for the session. Yes, please, if you haven't sent in your questions, now is an opportunity for you to do so, and it will be addressed accordingly. So I have a question for you. We say organizational resilience is the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to incremental change. Now, I just want to understand, is it any different from risk management?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's a question that I'm asked all the time. And I'm often also asked, is it any different to business continuity and crisis management? I think it is in a number of ways. I think it differs in terms of risk. Risk management tends to look at the probability and the consequence of certain types of risks. So one of the challenges with risk management is it'll only look at those foreseeable risks to the business that can be classified according to probability and consequence. One of the things with resilience is that it acknowledges that the problems for an organization might not even show up on a risk radar or on a risk register. It's usually the combination of lots of small things happening over a long period of time that combine to destabilize the business. So I think that is one way that it's different. I think another way that it's different is that risk management tends to be quite a technical discipline that's held by people that do risk management or governance in the business. I think resilience is a strategic issue for the organization because it's not just about what can go wrong, it's also about what can go right. And thinking it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving. And it's about thinking strategically about the future of the business and the purpose of the organization. And I think it's that switch of mindset that makes resilience different to both risk and continuity management. I often talk about the need for organizations to change before the cost of not changing becomes too great. So let me just repeat that again. So changing before the cost of not changing becomes too great. Kodak was a great example of an organization that didn't change until it was too late. And these things wouldn't even show up as risk management. It's the organization saying, okay, where do we need to be in the future? How do we need to change now to ensure that we have the long-term survivability of the organization and we thrive moving forward? So it's that more progressive piece, but also that it's changing the organization and it requires adaptation and innovation, even sometimes when it requires us to really challenge and rethink maybe what is a winning formula, like the Kodak example. So many organizations just hold on to doing what they've always done. So I think it's more about change and it's more about adaptability than you get from risk management or business continuity.
Thank you so much for that response. We haven't received any questions from you. Please send in your questions. Sir, do you have any last words for us just before we call it an afternoon or an evening, as it were?
No, I was hoping there'd be a few more questions from. Okay.
Okay, one just came in.
Yeah.
Regarding risk and challenging the status quo, how do we manage this in an organization that has a defensive mindset?
Yeah, a very good question. I think that one of the challenge. I think this is one of the great challenges that we have. I've seen more and more organizations really over the last 5 years drifting into a more defensive mindset. And I think I often use the analogy of an animal. Think of any animal. An animal has 3 responses to a threat, okay? So it has a flight response, it can run away. It has a fight response, it can take on the threat and fight it, or it can freeze, yeah? So the freeze response is another. So you've got 3 responses. And if you think about a tortoise, for me, has perfected that 3rd response, a freeze response. It's created a protective shell over itself. And when it sees the threat, it hides inside its shell and it waits for the threat to go away. And that's a really good analogy, I think, for organizations, because what I see is as we've got a more Vuca environment, more and more organizations are becoming more like the tortoise. They are embracing that freeze response. They're building their defenses around the organization, and they hope the threat will kind of go away. And what I see, and we see it all the time, being in an environment where we are helping develop leadership and we're doing courses, and is that when an organization feels threatened, it stops innovating, it stops adapting, and it loses its flight response. Now, the freeze response is really good for the tortoise if the threat is something like a cat. But if the tortoise is in the middle of the road and the threat is a lorry, the tortoise is in big trouble. And I think that's the problem, is that we've created quite defensive organizations like the tortoise, yet we've got these really big macro level changes that are coming very close, very soon. And we've lost that agility and that flexibility. In order to be more flexible and more agile, I think it really does take people to rethink the organization and actually challenge some of the status quo. One of the things that we always say is that if you want to move into a more adaptive, more innovative mindset, you've got to create the psychological safety for people to do that. To experiment and to try new things is actually quite threatening for the organization. And as leaders in the organization, I think we need to create environments where people are able to experiment without fear of failure. In fact, innovation requires us to fail many times, and actually it's better to fail faster and to bring in and to be more innovative, because as soon as you create an environment where people don't feel safe to innovate, they just won't do so. So I think psychological safety. I'd also say, because I've got some other questions coming up here, it'd be really worth looking at some of the work around design thinking. I think design thinking is a really useful methodology for getting people to shift out of their current mindset and really think about how they might change and transform and try and experiment and prototype and try new things moving forward. So those are a few thoughts for that first one.
Thank you.
How do you manage preventative control in relation to compliance?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that compliance is a central element of preventative control. This is another one where it's really about that shift from it's only about compliance to hold on, what about having some mindful action in the organization as well. I think that if you think about driving a car, I often use this with leaders that are, they say, oh, we can't shift away from this purely compliance-based culture because it will create more errors, and human error is one of the sources of problems, and we're going to have more problems if we have more improvisation and more experimentation. Yeah, if you think about driving your car, do you drive somewhere safely because your car has had your car's been tested, that at some point in your life you've passed some examination or test to give you a license to drive, so you're duly qualified to do that, and that you maybe have a copy of the highway code and the rules of the road in the glove compartment. It's not. It's actually that you're making micro adjustments all the time. You're building situational awareness. You're sensing the environment. You're noticing problems. So actually what I say to a lot of organizations is that the way that work gets actually done in the organization is that people are improvising and adapting all of the time. And I think we've got to recognize that. And I think that we often focus on what goes wrong, but not just what goes right. And I think if we do that and we can start to say, hold on, you know, some of this improvisation, some of this adjustment, some of this experimentation is actually the thing that's keeping the system safe, then we can shift out of that mindset that compliance is the only answer. Was there one above? Are organizations with autocratic leaders doomed to fail in a disruptive era? Okay, yeah, nice question. I think the notion of autocratic leaders, it comes back to my my point about fit for purpose. And I would say that it's about the nature of the organizational challenge. If the organizational challenge is one where it requires, like it's a critical problem, you know, I've known an organization recently that needed to go through a period of rapid transformation and driving that change through to cut numbers of staff, to cut cost. And actually it required a degree of autocratic leadership to get through that process. Is that long-term sustainable? No. But for that type of problem, it kind of worked. But that kind of leader, when you're moving into a problem that is more tame and certainly one that's more complex, just isn't the right leadership style for that type of problem. And I think you're probably right. Autocratic leadership doesn't, for me, really sit well with really complex problems. I think what leadership style works really well, or leadership for those problems, is that it's much more collaborative, it's much more distributed, it's much more empowering to allow the solutions to emerge and for us to learn our way to those kind of issues. How individuals can develop resilience. Yes, I think there is certainly a relationship between individual resilience and organizational resilience. But I don't think organizational resilience is the sum of having lots of resilient individuals. I think it's substantially different, and it's related to the element of strategic resilience and operational resilience and cultural resilience. Individual resilience is a very interesting concept, and there's so much that's been written on it. I think the overlap is in that area of psychological safety, and having people that feel safe enough that they can step up and that they can experiment and they can try new things and they can innovate. So I think there is an overlap, but they are kind of distinctly different concepts.
Okay, another question here says, much of what I've heard about resilience sounds like change management. Please share more about the similarities, overlaps, and differences between resilience and change management.
Yeah. Oh, another great question. Thank you. Is that Basula?
Yes.
Yes. I think one of my early slides was had change and resilience on the change side. I think resilience is about change, and I think it's about, as I said before, it's about change before the cost of not changing becomes too great, but also to pick up on the subtle changes in the organization that might be drifting towards failure. One of the challenges I see with a lot of the change management thinking is that it sees it as a very linear process, a bit like one of my slides that had that stepwise: analyze the problem, formulate a solution, implement the solution, etc. And change is seen as kind of steps, like Cotter's 7 steps to change. And a lot of the change approaches to change are built on Kurt Lewin's work. And if you look at Kurt Lewin said that to change an organization, you have to unfreeze the current ways of working, you shift the organization, you refreeze. Now, I would challenge that notion of change, because I think we are in a period that we're unfrozen now. We're in a period of instability. We're in a period where it's constant change. So this notion of kind of unfreezing and then changing. So I kind of I'm challenge the notion that you can do change in a step-by-step process for complex problems. I kind of challenge the notion that we have a period of stability. I think we're in a very unstable period. And I think that the key thing with resilience is it looks at what happens if you don't change effectively. So in some ways, it's kind of it almost also demonstrates the negative side, what can go wrong in the organization if it doesn't attend to it. The optimum organization to balance all 4 ways. Yes. So one of the things I'm often asked with the square, the kite profile, is would a perfect square in the middle therefore be the optimum? Because then we're balanced of everything. And I don't think it is, actually. I think wherever that square fits needs to be fit for the organization. So my 4 examples, I actually want my nuclear reprocessing plant, my nuclear facility, to be a bit more in the preventative control, but not 100%. I actually want maybe your small entrepreneurial or software firm that is very entrepreneurial, innovative. I want it to be more top right, but not at the expense of the others. So I think every organization has an optimum profile for what it's trying to do, and that's determined by its purpose, its people, its products that it has, and its existing processes. Those have to be taken into account. It's when an organization becomes blinkered, it only sees the world in one way, and I think that's where we lose resilience, is that it creates a blind spot, and if that's not attended to, then we drift into problems.
I have one that was sent in on the chat. It says, how would people management be aligned with leadership change resilience?
Okay, so I think that I said earlier, I think resilience, I think the essence of resilience is that it is cultural. I often see so many organizations that think resilience is about systems and it's about processes and it's about technology. I think it's about people. I think it's about the people of the organization, and it's about the culture of the organization, and is the culture fit for purpose? And culture and leadership go hand in hand. What leadership in organizations, what I see a lot is that people not necessarily listening to what the leader says, but they'll definitely watch what the leaders do in the organization. And what a leader doesn't attend to in the organization, what they walk past, what they don't notice, sets the standard for that organization, sets the organizational culture. And so for me, leadership and culture go hand in hand. But I think the people profession, I think the people management is absolutely central to resilience. Unless you've got people that fit the profile in terms of those 4 approaches, and the square being the amalgamation of those that's fit for purpose. If your culture doesn't match your purpose, then I think the organization is going to face difficulties.
Okay, how can the resilience mindset be built in everyone in an organization?
How can the mindset be built? Okay, very good one. Well, first of all, you could come on a Cranfield program of, we do exactly this, this kind of work. It has to be driven through the organization at all levels. So for me, it starts with the senior management team and really understanding, for them to understand resilience and to be able to communicate it in a way that is understood by everyone. I think then resilience needs to be built into, in every organization, you have a number of levers that people can pull to shape organizational culture. So there's things like the leadership development profiles and competency profiles. There's things like the reward and recognition schemes. There's the things that are around measurement and monitoring. All of those things need to be aligned towards resilience if you want to get that cultural change. But my joke at the start, I think training and development is really key to this as well. Unless people really you need to use training to be able to challenge people's assumptions around existing ways of working and new ways of working, and to learn and understand different approaches. And I think that can come through training. So for me, if you're trying to make a cultural change, it would be senior leadership commitment and role modeling, then into we align our processes and systems, so we get the direction, we get the alignment, and then we build the commitment bottom up. And I often talk about that in terms of leadership in an organization. If you want to make leadership or cultural change, 3 key things to focus on: absolutely getting a shared sense of direction, an alignment of all of our systems and processes, and then the commitment of the people to make it happen. So direction, alignment, commitment would be 3 aspects that I would work on.
Thank you so much, sir. A final question here.
Yeah.
Who should anticipate and prepare the most for organizational resilience? Is it the organization's management or its employees?
Oh, that is a brilliant question. Yeah. Okay, so I think it's got to be everyone, but I think it's more likely in an organization to be everyone, the people that are closest to the action, the people that are dealing with those issues every day. Because I think leaders in the organization may be able to anticipate some of the broader shifts, but I think people in the organization will pick up on some of the internal issues and challenges. So I do think it needs to be both. I think I would add in also that it also requires leaders in the organization to listen to those people who raise issues and notice the problems. As soon as you create a culture where people maybe are noticing things, reporting them, but they're not listened to, then what will naturally happen is people will stop the reporting. So I think what we need to do in organizations is have leaders that are very willing to hear the bad news as well as the good news, that are very willing to be open to people coming up with new solutions and to reporting of problems. So I think it's probably a bit of both. It's a combination of the 2. But a great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. This is to inform us that Cipm is partnering with Cranfield University to bring us some very interesting offerings in 2020. We would like you all to follow us on all our social media platforms for more information. Again, do not forget to connect with David Denya on LinkedIn for more information.
Yeah,
on that note, sir, I would like to say a very big thank you to you. Thank you for your valuable time. Thank you for giving us the value we've gotten this afternoon. Any final words?
No, thank you very much. And it was really nice to talk to you today. And as I said at the start, these webinars, I think, are really good to start a conversation. So please do connect to me on LinkedIn, send me some questions, read some of my articles, and let's continue to discuss these really important points.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a very good evening.
And you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So just before we go, ladies and gentlemen, we have a few questions for you. We would like to hear your feedback on all of our trainings, all of our webinars we've done in the last 9 months, since February 2019. We've run a total of about 9 to 10 webinars, including the one we did today. And we would like to hear your feedback. So please, we know we have a few of us that have joined over and again. Some of us have been very faithful since the beginning of the webinar series. What would you like us to improve upon? What would you like us to bring about in 2020? What new topics would you like to see? What would you like us to implement in the webinar series going forward? And for that reason, we want to give a few of us the opportunity to dial in. Yes, we said it. We want you to dial in. We want to hear from you. What would you like us to do differently with respect to the webinars? What topics would you like us to bring up for you next year? What would you like us to implement? We know that there were some webinars where we had 2 people facilitate the session. That was done in April. We had sessions where we had people dial in to give us their feedbacks, to share their experiences. So we want to hear from you. What would you like us to do differently? If you have anything to say, any contributions to make at this point, we would ask that you please raise your hands and the floor will be open to you. Anyone? Dial in. Maria, we see you. Yes, please. You're on air, Maria. I would like to hear from you. Good afternoon. Hello, Maria. Can you hear us? Because we can't hear you. Maria, you might have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. You've turned off your mic.
Okay.
Yes, we hear you now. Yes, it is. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, and thank you for that very, very interesting topic.
Thank you so much.
And fine rendition. Yes, by Dave. I would want CIPN to look into a topic like design thinking. And when we are doing design thinking, you know, in this day and age, so many people can work on the internet and download things, and then they just come in and regurgitate to the class.
True.
Maybe get a session where design thinking has been done by this group or this person, and then we are getting live examples so that we have things, you know, we can look back to. But if we just have people who just come in, open the books, you know, go to and things without using their experience, then it's a problem. So a topic I would like us to look at is design thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your contribution, yes. Maria.
Okay.
Okay, Samuel, we can hear you. Can you please speak up? Hello, Samuel. Unmute yourself, Samuel.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. Good afternoon.
Okay, afternoon. In fact, it's great to be on this webinar today. I want to appreciate you and the Cipm organization for this opportunity. And as well, I say all the webinars we have had for this year is interesting and wonderful. My own is just to say, let us continue on it. Let us not wither. Let's continue on it and make sure that we put more effort. God bless you all.
Amen. Thank you so much for that reaffirmation, Samuel. We really do appreciate this feedback. Thank you so much. Okay, Paul, the floor is yours. Can you hear us, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, please go ahead. Yes, we can. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well done. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
You know, to Mr. Denver for the, Professor Denver for the session. Although I joined in a bit late as I was running away from meeting, but at least I met the question and answer, which were very useful. I think, you know, one area that I would like to see CIPN give attention to has to do with mental issues in the workplace.
Okay.
Yeah, so the whole gamut around, you know, how we can, you know, I mean, support, you know, employees and create an environment that allows people to, speak out about the challenges they are facing, and so that they can be addressed easy. Before they become toxic and things like that. So that's one area of focus that I'd like to see in 2020.
2020. Okay. Were you opportune to attend any other webinar series apart from this one?
Well, I know that I attended a couple on this list.
Okay.
Yeah, if there were others, maybe if maybe I missed those ones. Was there one that?
But do you think the facilitators did a good job of each of the topics you attended?
Oh yeah. Obviously, if you think about webinars and understand, the lady that spoke before, talking about design thinking and the whole process of how we can take these things to the next step. I think, in fairness, all the facilitators that have come in have done a great job. They've come with a lot of background knowledge, and have shared experiences, which is what some of these webinars are supposed to be, sharing experiences of what has worked, what has challenged that effort from working, and what sort of ideas people can keep in mind when they're trying to implement some of these initiatives. To a large extent, my score would be an average of about 75 if I were to give a score.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate you. Thank you for the feedback, sir. We can only take one more feedback before we round up this session. Folake, we would like to hear from you. Please go ahead. Hello, Folake, can you hear us? You might need to unmute yourself. Okay, Samson Owolabi, we would like to hear from you. Can you please unmute yourself, Samson, so we can hear you?
Thank you.
Okay, we can hear you, sir. Good afternoon.
All right, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
All right. Yeah, I was actually taught a lot of things, and then I just want to say a big thank you, actually, because this is actually my first time of being, a part of this, and then it's really looking like a lot of things are just changed in me. So I want to say thank you to Cipm that
Thank you.
the good thing that Cipm has been doing, they should keep on with it. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So that's
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, so but before you leave, I'd just like to ask you, is there a particular topic of interest you want to see in 2020?
Yes, actually, I think I would like the mental side that the last person said. I think Paul,
Yes.
and I think it's really related to the first suggestion. At the same time, that is the side of design thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, which is restricted in a way. So it wouldn't just be like people will be pouring their ideas like and then it will be wasted like that. Such that we could have a platform where
Samson, we seem to have lost you there. We really can't hear what you're saying anymore.
Compiled and then we have it been talked about. Do you get now?
Yes, I get you.
Okay.
All right.
Did you hear?
Thank you so much. Yes, we did. We heard what you said,
so what I'm trying to say is, okay. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for those feedbacks. We in Cipm believe in feedbacks, positive, negatives. They help us to improve our processes. And we can't do all of these improvements if we don't hear from you. So I want to say a very big thank you to each and every one of you. And thank you for being a part of our webinar series. Before we leave, however, I would like to, at this point, invite you to the Cipm HR Best Practice Award Night. coming up on the 12th of December. Please listen to this very short video.
This December, we bring you the HR Oscars. It is the CIPM Awards night. All is set to celebrate HR excellence across various sectors in Nigeria by rewarding organizations with a consistent track record of world-class HR practices, as well as winners of the CIPM SA competition. The award categories are HR Best Practice Awards, HR Optimization Awards, SA Competition Awards. It promises to be a night of fun, glitz, and glamour. Date, Thursday, December 12, 2019. Venue, Eco Hotel and Suites, Victoria Island, Lagos. Time, 6 p.m. Red carpet starts at 5 p.m. Special guest of honor, Mr. Olu Onokoya, former chairman and managing director, Mobile Oil Nigeria PLC. Dress code, formal and glamorous. Tickets, regular 15,000 naira, VIP 25,000 naira, table of 8 200,000 naira. To purchase your tickets, please visit www.cipmnigeria.org/HR awards. For more information, please email hrbpawards@cipmnigeria.org. Media partners, Plus TV. CIPM, we deliver value through people.
Okay, we hope you get your tickets very soon. The entire webinar series was put together by a group of people, was put together by the Learning and Consultancy team, headed by Titi Ashiru, the Director of Learning and Consultancy, the team lead, Ibitayo Ogumbangu, and myself, Henrietta Chukuka. Also, we have with me my colleagues, John Mote, Oluwabukola Odedere, and Usman Yahaya. This is the entire Learning and Consultancy team of the Institute. But we cannot fail to appreciate the ICT team, headed by Peter Clark, supported by Daniel and Tommy Singh. We also would not fail to appreciate the CMC team, Corporate Marketing and Communications team, that allowed us the opportunities to air our offerings on all our social media platforms. We want to appreciate everyone. We thank you for your immense support. We thank you for contributing your quota towards the development of the Institute. And above all, we say happy holidays to you. We hope to see you in 2020. And we say at this point, God bless every one of you. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good evening.